Was it worth it? As you probably saw from the thumbnail, 2 years, $25,000. This is what I have to show for it. What did I learn? What could I have done differently? This is not my first Subaru build. And this video doesn't just apply to Subarus, right? It applies to modifying all cars. So this is probably like my 10th Subaru. This one was cheap to start off with. And that's the first tip that I'll give, the first thing I learned. And this started early on, probably 5 or 6 builds ago, but this build specifically I knew going in. So you may be new to this. The first thing I suggest is buying the right and finding the right car for you. So that means, do you want something beat up? This car was $400 when I bought it, $400. It is nothing like it was nothing like it looks today. It was an automatic 1.8 liter with like all of 100 horsepower, right? So you probably saw in the thumbnail, we'll show pictures here. $400 to me was well worth it as long as it had good bones because I knew I was going to dig into it. That might not be for everybody. Maybe you want something that's already modified. Maybe you don't want to go down the modified rabbit hole or just do minor mods to make the car yours, right? It's already been tastefully modified. That's the kind of car you're looking for. And then the stock or the new car, that may be something that you want, something that's been untouched, and you're going to bring it to life in your own way. Those are the three kind of cars that you have there, and you have to make sure that you choose the right one. Like otherwise you'll be fighting demons. If you buy a beat up one and you really needed kind of more of a new stock one, you're not going to have a good time. You'll end up probably selling the car or just being turned off from the scene in general. The second thing is being able to pivot. And in minor amounts, right? As you modify your car, you may have a plan in mind, but that plan, you're probably going to deviate from it eventually in some way, shape, or form. This car specifically started off as probably just a weekend car. I was going to just build, it's like a third car that I have. It's something that I just wanted to have a little bit of fun with. And now it's a track car. Like I drive it on the street, but only really to test it for the track. So I definitely pivoted there. Not a huge amount, but definitely there are some things with your build that you're going to have to do or with your modifications. There's a difference between a weekend racer and a dedicated track car, right? So we have to keep that in mind. I will say, for most people, I would build it, not that in preparation that you're going to track it, but build it with err on the side of caution. So if you want 300 horsepower, build the motor or build things up supporting mods for 400, right? So just in case you have that leeway. That's another thing that I learned, building ahead. And in that same vein with the pivoting, I learned early on too that I had this goal in mind, even for the weekend car. I said I want 400 horsepower. 400 wheel horsepower is where I wanted to go. I had this power to weight ratio number in my head. And then once I felt about 340 on the stock turbo, you can go through my other videos if you want to see my exact mods. I'll post links above in the description. But I got about 340, 350, and that felt great. I didn't need to hit that 400 number. It was just a number, right? So I thought that I wanted it or I thought that I needed it. Turns out I didn't. Eventually I did go up higher, but the reason I stayed around that 350 for quite a bit of time was because I was afraid that, with more power came more either longevity issues, reliability, and turbo lag, just random things. I was like, is it really worth it for that extra little bit? Can I change, the goalpost just a little bit? Do I need exactly what I set out for? And that's an example just of, horsepower. A lot of people think of horsepower when they think of modifying cars. Some people may be thinking suspension, brakes, those other things, right? So I have coilovers on my car. I spent $1,200 on coilovers. They're BCBR coilovers, not lowest, but a budget coilover even for BC. And right now I'm looking at different coilovers, track-based coilovers, right? So these will do fine for the track, but there's definitely one, some digressive springs, or you want a little bit better coilover than the ones I'm running now if it's a dedicated track car. And then I just got done selling wheels that I had for the car. I purchased wheels with a larger offset, so it would fit the wheel well very nicely, or the fender, if you will, come right up to it, flush, if you will. And then I need a wider tire. So with that offset, if I put a wider tire on, I'll be over the fender. I'll be past flush, if you will, and maybe need fender flares or a wide body. And that's something I don't want to do. So I'd end up selling those wheels. And I'm on my winter set now, and I just bought a set of RPF ones. So it's one of those, be ready to pivot. Be ready to pivot. I'm going into like low level here depth, but staying high level, just be ready to pivot. It's supposed to be the definition of what you want for your car. It should be pretty broad. It shouldn't be too specific, because things are going to change unless you can throw a lot of money at once, or you know the car very well and what it's going to do for you. Especially if you're new to a car brand, then this is like my 10th build, and I was on Subaru build, and I still, deviated a little bit, but money's a little bit different now. And obviously everyone isn't able to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on modifying vehicles. So just keep that in mind. Along that same vein, saving money. You may have heard buy once, cry once, which I do prescribe to quite a bit for a lot of things. But with that said, most of the parts that I put on this vehicle, performance or otherwise, the vehicle's old anyway, are secondhand parts. This is very important, and this will save you a lot of money. Will you occasionally get a part that, you have to go look at it, right? That maybe you go look at a part from Facebook Marketplace, OfferUp, Craigslist, whatever, and it didn't turn out to be what the buyer said, or it wasn't as good. Yes, there will be some wasted time. However, for the most part, with secondhand purchases, you're going to get a 50% discount on parts like, let's say, an exhaust for your car. That's the car's excrement. It's pushing waste out the back of the vehicle. Typically, those can obviously be scuffed up and damaged, but I'm probably on my 10th variation of an exhaust for this car. I literally haven't really spent any money on an exhaust, and I have 10. I've had 10. What I do is I bought my first used one for about $300, and then when I got sick of it, I sold it for $300 and bought another used one for $300, and then just kept that train going. You can do the same thing for, obviously, if you purchase a new exhaust, you're going to lose money on that deal, though, because when you sell it, you're not going to make as much money back. So it's things like that. I'm not saying go to your buddy's car, drain his oil out, and use it as your new oil. There are exceptions to the rule, right? So, but for the most part, the motor is secondhand. I'm running a JDM motor that was taken out of a Japanese car and shipped over to me. That's secondhand. That I didn't really save money on that, but you can save quite a bit of money. Carbon fiber hood, secondhand. There are parts that you don't want to buy secondhand. I'm just like what's behind me, but the seats that are in the car, I'm not going to buy those really secondhand, because you don't know if they've been in an accident. They're racing seats, a roll bar, harnesses, hit or miss, but either way, some things you don't want to buy secondhand. Obviously, internal components to the motor, that's up to you. I wouldn't do that, even if they haven't been used, but keep in mind, secondhand parts, you can save a lot of money. And that's the thing. When you're buying these secondhand parts, or even if you don't buy secondhand parts, buy the parts that are kind of popular. And I know that sounds, I don't want to be like everybody else, but if it doesn't work out for you, then you can always sell it, right? So it's something that if it's popular, if maybe it's not exactly your cup of tea, but it's close, then I would stay along those same lines. People know in the Subaru brand, they know exhausts of NVIDIA, Tomei, and obviously for Subaru engines, they know about IAG air oil separators, various things like that, right? Cobb, like those names are synonymous with Subarus, right? And excellent parts. So if you buy from those brands, or even buy those brands secondhand, you will, even if you don't like the part eventually, you can sell it and recoup most of your money, or trading it up, if you will. So that's something to keep in mind. I know no one wants to just follow every cookie cutter build that everyone else has done, but if you're trying to do it more on a budget, that can save you a lot of time. And again, this applies for all cars, not just for Subarus. I haven't really deviated too much from the Subaru scene. I've gone into Hondas a little bit. I do have a Nissan pickup, but I stay in the Subaru realm when it comes to tuning right now until this sets loose, the motor gives away, and then I'll probably throw it in the garbage and start over maybe with a Honda or something. We'll see. The second thing is when you plan this is not the second thing, this is like the fourth thing. The money that you have to put into the vehicle, a lot of people some people start off with a budget, not just for the car, but for modification. Hey, I want to make it this far, right? This car right here, I plan on spending $10,000 tops. Obviously, we're, double that and more, 1.5 times that. So it's just one of the things where I would just take the money that you have allotted for it, double it, at least for the modifications. The car could be a different story. You may save money actually finding a car, but modifying the car, it's going to get expensive quick. You're going to have to, like we talked about, pivot at one point, which means possibly selling parts and losing money, or adding to those parts in what you thought, or taking parts off, installing different ones. Just in general, it could just, it's the time and money involved. Just plan on doubling that easily. And the last thing, like we said, plan on tracking the car. If you plan on, when I say tracking it, build it like you're going to take it to the track and just beat on it constantly. And what you're doing in that sense is you're building something that will be reliable for a street build. Obviously, there's exceptions to that rule. Do not add crazy suspension that's going to be unbelievably stiff, but it will be great for the track, or 200 treadwear tires and say, well, you said build it like for the track. I'm talking about your motor, like, for example, these have issues with oil starvation, with the pickup failing, or just with high G's and the pan. So replacing the oil pan, replacing the oil pickup, just changing the oil regularly, various things like the suspension, building that up, changing all the bushings out, things that if they did, like if they were prone to failure, then you already crossed that bridge and you already built those things up, so you're not screwed down the line. That's the biggest thing, I think, is building the car up. A lot of people, I know people want to save money. I want to save money too, right? And we just talked about several ways how to do it if you didn't know already. But don't kind of skimp on those mods that really could save the car's life, right? So the oiling obviously is the lifeblood of the car. So definitely spend money there. Bushings, various things, like obviously don't skimp out on that. The last thing, and probably the biggest mod you can do to your car, right? The biggest mod. Most people who have seen my videos are probably going to say, well, he's going to talk about power to weight here and lightening the car. Nope. I will say that you do need to lighten it, but that's a video for another time, or I'll link that video above, why you should lighten your car and why power to weight, or why 500 horsepower doesn't matter, and the weight of the vehicle matters way more than the horsepower. The driver mod, getting time behind the wheel, driving this car. A lot of people that I know and have worked on their cars, help them buy a car sight unseen or brand new, and then drive it for maybe a week or 2 weeks, and I have the mod bug. I have the mod bug. I need to mod it. I need to do this. I need to do that. In a week or 2 weeks time, I'm sorry, unless you're a professional driver, you're not really going to be able to, and you're taking it to the track, you're not going to know what the car needs at that point. You're just not. You have to really put the time in. Like, obviously, not just, if you take it to the track, that'd be great. That's the way you're going to really feel what the car needs. But not everybody wants to take it to the track, right? Maybe you just want to know, on a back road twisties, or I want to do a highway pull, and maybe the gear ratios are wrong. Maybe you don't need more power. Maybe you just need better gearing. The strength of the gears. Maybe there's various things. A lot of people just attack right away, especially with horsepower. I need more power now. That you need to be a better driver first. You'd be surprised that a great driver in a slow car will always beat a bad driver or an inexperienced driver in a fast car, because the inexperienced driver in the faster or more powerful car is going to make mistakes. And it's not going to be pretty when you're doing it with more power as opposed to less. So you want to start off with less power. So when you do make those mistakes, if you're pushing the car hard, when you do make those mistakes, it's forgivable or more forgivable. I'm not saying every mistake is. So what would if I could end this video, what would I personally want? Like, what car would I start off with? If you're looking at the Subaru line, for me specifically, the Subaru line, I would stay around that WRX, the older ones, like 220 horsepower, 227, I think it had stock. And it's going to be hard to find those stock. and lower, even NA motors. So this doesn't just apply to Subarus, but the one behind me came with an EJ22. It's an NA motor. It had like 140 horsepower. That's an excellent example of something that it won't be like super lightweight, but it'll be lighter and have a great amount of like horsepower for an inexperienced driver or somebody new, right? Somebody even new to the platform. It's a very reliable motor as long as you change the oil. Great. That's where I would stay. Somewhere, if I had to guess a power to weight or a pound to power ratio that an inexperienced driver should start off at, it would be in like the 10, 12, probably the 12, 15 range, maybe, like somewhere way up there. And when I say that power to or weight to power range, I mean, how for every like horsepower, how many pounds are you trying to, push? This car is about 6.5. So roughly for every 1 horsepower, it's trying to push 6.5 pounds. That's how heavy it is. So it weighs about 2690 and it has about 400 horsepower, which again, for an inexperienced driver, like my wife, for example, wants to learn and wants to go to the track. I said, not on this, you don't. This is not the car that you get behind. It is all-wheel drive. There are some things that'll make it easier for a new driver, but I wouldn't suggest it. It would be the car that's, NA, the car that's 140 horsepower, maybe a Miata. Miata would be great as well. Miata's almost, I know I'm going to sound crazy, almost too fast for an inexperienced driver because it's super lightweight and has like, 150, 160 horsepower. The older ones do. And even the BRZ is like a little bit heavier than this car, but has about 200 horsepower. That may be a good car too because it's newer. It has a little bit more like traction control. It has things of that sort that you can use at your disposal, turn off and on, see how it feels differently with that. But that's the kind of cars that those kind of lines there. Again, around the 15 pounds to 1 horsepower range if you're inexperienced. And then increment your way closer to that. That doesn't mean if you have 15 pounds to 1 horsepower, you don't just, I mastered this, so let's just slice down those numbers, either subtracting weight or adding power. Maybe do some tire or suspension modifications or brake modifications. Really, you can get a lot out of a car, and it's going to last a lot longer. The less modifications you do to it, right? It'll last a lot longer. Typically, there are cars that need them from the factory. So that's my biggest thing. I think I want to highlight is the driver mod, right? The driver mod is by far like you can't beat that. I'm learning myself. Like for me, I was more of a weekend kind of warrior. I did occasional autocross, but it was mainly just driving the car on back roads, highway poles, and twisties, like back road twisties and stuff. So it was one of those things where I went to the track and I noticed I changed the gear oil out, and now it's not doing it as much anymore. But I noticed very slight after I went to my first track day, a third to fourth gear or fourth gear in general kind of grind on the 6-speed transmission. They're pretty stout, and the reason being I wasn't heel towing, right? I wasn't rev matching on the downshifts, and just going harder and harder into that gear. When I was on those downshifts coming out of turns, it was the fourth gear was just taking a beating. Fourth gear is notoriously weak on these transmissions, and it was only one track day, and obviously changing the gear oil, the problem immediately went away. But it's one of those things to look out for, right? So if I would have been more equipped with heel towing and just rev matching in general on those downshifts, that problem would have never even came up. Granted, I would have changed my transmission fluid anyway, but it's one of those things. We all screw up. So, and then knowing what the car needs, right? So after taking it to the track, now I know way more what the car, I told you I need wider tires. I was running Summers. I'm going to get a 200 tread wear tire. Like that's something that I felt out at the track. You're not going to be able to feel that. Like you can't really feel what the car needs unless you're really pushing it, right? The only place to safely do that is the track. You can do that obviously on some back roads if you're familiar. I'm not endorsing breaking the law in any way, shape. I would never do that. But it's one of those things where if you don't push the car, you're not going to know what it needs. And if you don't push yourself, right? So it's braking habits as well. Heel towing it's one of those things that may feel unnatural. For me, as an example, it's you're pressing 3 pedals at once at a given time. So it can be kind of odd. It feels kind of weird, right? It doesn't feel like something you'd be doing. You're always told not to press everything at once. this obviously it's blipping, but it's one of those things where it's a learning experience for me. It doesn't feel right. And it's something that's one of the reasons I'm taking the car out and I'm not actually tracking it, is so I can practice that heel toe downshift. Just get more familiar with it so I can do it at higher speeds. I'm not just doing it at stoplights or coming up to right turns or something like that. So yeah, that's the biggest thing. So again, to summarize, finding the right car for you. That's the first thing. Not just the brand, but also how it's been treated or its current condition, or if it's stock or not, or brand new, right? Because that runs the gamut. Second, be ready to pivot, because you're going to. You may have a goal set in mind, and you may realize that, like I did, and then eventually came back to it, but you may realize that that was too lofty of a goal. You don't need that, right? You checked the box that you wanted to check in terms of how the car feels, and met that, right? Thirdly, saving money with secondhand parts. Know when to buy once, cry once, and know when you can save money on, the exhaust, the car's excrement. You can buy secondhand. It's just a piece of pipe. There's not really, people can scrape it up, but there's not really much that can go wrong with that. Obviously examine it. There's not really much that can go wrong with stuff like exhaust. And then take the money that you have for the build, not for the car necessarily, but have for the build in mind, and at least double it. By at least double it. It's going to get pricey, but I can tell you this, it's going to be an awesome experience. Whether you're doing the mods yourself or you're paying someone else to do it, when you see a finished product, and you're at the track, or whether you're doing whatever you want to do on the weekend, driving the car through back roads or doing a highway pull against the Hellcat that you really wanted to beat, it's going to put a smile on your face, and that's going to be, I think, worth double the budget at the end of the day. You don't want to meet that goal that you had, but doing so in the cheapest way possible, and cheaping out in places where the car is going to be reliable. So instead of having fun while you're doing it, you're like, is this the last time I shift the car because it's going to break? So again, plan on doubling that budget. It's going to get bad. And then build it for the track. I know that sounds crazy. Not necessarily exactly the track, but like we just said, build it up. Build it up to where if the goal gets bigger than what you originally thought, then you're not I have a front mount, right? You don't need a front mount intercooler for your turbo when you're running a stock, a build, right? A top mount is what these come with. And you don't really need that for, a weekend racer or something with 340 horsepower. Once you get up to that 400 horsepower range, and let alone tracking the car, because again, that top mount is just resting on the motor and getting really, really, really hot, and the hood scoop can only do so much. It's one of those things where I had the front mount from the beginning because I knew that I was going to build my way up. It's not just about horsepower or suspension modifications, it's reliability modifications as well, knowing that I'm going to need this to keep the car safe and to keep it on the road. So I'll leave it at that. If you could, it'd be great. I'm just kind of a new guy starting out. If you want to subscribe, I have all kinds of stuff. I'll link a video at the end here. But I talk quite a bit. I have some install videos. If you guys have some suggestions as well, let me know. But thanks.